I couldn't breathe when I saw it. My hands were shaking so hard I smeared the ink across the page. There was my signature. Clean, confident, perfect. Except it wasn't mine. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet and tried to remember how it felt to trust someone without flinching. I tasted metal. I kept swallowing like that would push the truth back down. It didn't. Something had been taken from me that I can't replace with an apology. Not my pride, not my peace. Something bigger. A life I paid for. A home I thought was safe. Money I earned. A future I planned. The worst part wasn't the loss. It was knowing it was intentional. Documented. Done by someone close enough to touch me. And then I saw the second file. My name, Hannah Mercer. Before all of this, I was the kind of person who believed that if you did things properly, life stayed mostly predictable. I wasn't naive in the bright, careless way. I was cautious. I read contracts before I signed them. I kept folders for everything: mortgage statements, insurance renewals, pay slips, warranties for appliances we didn't even use. I tracked spending without making a show of it. Not because I was controlling, because I liked knowing where the ground was. And in the middle of all that order, I let myself be soft in one place. At home, I trusted. I didn't keep score. I didn't check phones. I didn't interrogate late finishes or ask for receipts like I was running an audit. I thought marriage meant you stopped acting like you had to defend your own life from the person sleeping beside you. Our friends would have described us as steady, not flashy, not dramatic. We hosted quiet dinners, we showed up to birthdays, we nodded along to other people's marital complaints, and privately felt grateful we didn't have those problems. I had my work, my routines, my small circle. He had his own pressures, his own moods. I made space for them. I thought that was what loyalty looked like. Looking back, the warning signs weren't cinematic, they were domestic. They were the kind of things you excuse because you don't want to be the woman who assumes the worst. Mail started disappearing. Not all of it. Just certain envelopes, the ones that looked official. I told myself it was misdelivery, that I'd opened something and forgotten where I'd put it, that I was tired. He became oddly interested in streamlining paperwork. He said it like it was a favor, like he was taking something off my plate. He offered to handle renewals, direct debits, boring admin. I remember feeling relieved. That's what makes me sick now, how easily relief can be used against you. There were small comments too, little tests, casual questions about what I'd do if something happened, about whether my name being on something really mattered, about how everyone moves money around for tax reasons, how the system is set up to punish normal people. He'd say these things in the kitchen while making tea, like he was talking about the weather, and I would nod. I would half listen. I didn't want to turn ordinary conversation into suspicion. I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to live like that. Then came the first moment my body reacted before my mind did. A notification, not dramatic, not even loud. Just a message that didn't make sense with the life I thought I was living. Something about our joint account that made my stomach drop so hard I had to sit down, right there, because my knees wouldn't hold me. I told myself there was a simple reason. A bank error, a glitch, a delayed payment. The kind of thing you sort out on a lunch break. At the branch, I kept my voice steady. I smiled the way women learn to smile when they're trying not to look frightened in public. I answered security questions. I watched the advisor's face change, just slightly, when she pulled up the account. She didn't look at me like I was a customer. She looked at me like I was a situation. There was a pause, a careful professional pause. Then she turned her screen a fraction, just enough to show me the details. Transfers, authorizations, documentation logged, a pattern that looked deliberate. Not messy. Not accidental. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My mouth went dry. I said, very quietly, that I didn't recognize any of it. She asked me if I'd recently signed any forms, any mandate updates, any changes to linked accounts. She kept her tone neutral, but there was something in the way she asked, like she already knew the answer and needed me to say it out loud. I told her I hadn't signed anything. And that's when she printed the first page, a clean copy. Neat lines, the kind of form I'd seen 100 times in my job. A document designed to make wrongdoing look like routine. My name was there, my address, my details, and my signature. I stared at it until the words on the page went fuzzy. I've signed my name the same way since I was a teenager. There are little imperfections I've always hated. The way one letter leans, the way I press too hard at the end. This signature didn't have them. It was too smooth, too confident, like an imitation drawn by someone who'd practiced. My throat tightened. My skin went cold. I asked for another copy, like maybe I'd hallucinated the first one. She slid a second page across the desk. Another authorization, another signature. Still not mine. There are moments when your brain tries to protect you by offering smaller truths. Maybe you signed it and forgot. Maybe you were distracted. Maybe you agreed to something and it didn't register. Maybe you're overreacting. But my hands were flat on the desk and I could feel the tremor in my fingers. And I knew, down in that unshakable place under thought, that I hadn't signed anything. Not this. Not ever. The advisor spoke again, gently, about procedures, about reporting, about next steps. Her words sounded far away, like I was underwater. I asked, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, to see everything connected to it, all the paperwork, all the changes. She hesitated. Then she stood and left the desk. When she came back, she held a thin folder like it weighed more than it should. She opened it. She pointed, and there it was. A separate set of documents, not just banking, transfers, declarations, pages that didn't belong in a normal life. My name printed again and again, like a stamp of consent. And on one page, in black and white, a line that made the room tilt around me, because it showed my identity being used to move something I didn't even know was being moved. I felt my vision narrow. My ears rang. I leaned closer, as if proximity could change what I was reading. Then I saw the witness line, and I recognized the handwriting. I didn't cry in the bank, not then. I sat very still and watched the advisor's finger rest beside that witness line, and my whole body went rigid, like if I moved, something inside me would spill out. I knew that handwriting. Not vaguely, not, it looks like. I knew it the way you know the shape of a key to your own front door. It belonged to someone I had fed in my kitchen, someone I had hugged hello, someone I had trusted to tell me the truth even when it was uncomfortable. My first thought was that I must be wrong, that my brain was reaching for patterns because it couldn't handle the alternative. I stared until my eyes hurt, trying to force the letters to rearrange themselves into a stranger's hand. They didn't. I left with copies in an envelope I held too tightly, like pressure could keep the past from changing. Outside, the air felt sharp and thin. People walked past me carrying coffees, laughing into their phones, living inside their normal days. I stood there with paper that said my life had been handled like a file. On the bus home, I kept looking at my hands, at my nails, at my skin. Like I expected to see the moment my signature had been taken from me, like a bruise that would finally surface. At home, I went straight to the laptop. I told myself I was just gathering facts, that I wasn't panicking, that I could still control the narrative if I got ahead of it. The first twist hit fast. The bank's contact details weren't mine anymore. The recovery email on the account wasn't mine. The phone number linked to security codes wasn't mine. My stomach turned over when I realized I hadn't missed alerts. They'd been redirected. It wasn't a mistake. It was management. Then I pulled my credit report. I felt something leave me when I saw it. Accounts I didn't recognize, searches I hadn't authorized, a balance that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just our money being moved. My name, my clean history, my carefulness had been used like collateral. I thought about my job, my role, the way my work depends on being trusted with numbers, with process, with compliance. I imagined someone pulling a file, seeing my credit flagged, quietly deciding I was a risk. No confrontation. Just a closed door I'd never even know existed. And then came the next revelation, colder because it wasn't digital. I went to where I keep our documents. The folder was thinner than it should have been. Not messy thin, curated. I flipped through it once, then again, faster, until my fingers were clumsy and my breathing got loud in my own ears. Missing papers, not random, specific. I checked the printer history. I checked the recycling. I checked the places people hide things when they're trying to be tidy while doing something wrong. Behind a stack of old mail, tucked into a magazine, I found a copy of something I'd never seen before. It looked official in the quiet way that makes you obey it without thinking. A declaration, a transfer, my name on it again, in that smooth imitation. But this time it wasn't about the bank. It was about the house. My mouth went dry as I read and reread the same lines, trying to understand how a home can still be yours in your head while it stops being yours on paper. I could see the language designed to sound reasonable. I could see where I was supposed to have agreed. I could see where the ownership had been reshaped around me, like someone building a wall while I was still living inside the room. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember every time I'd signed something without reading it twice, every time I'd handed over trust like it was harmless. Then the last twist arrived, and it was the one that made it personal in a way I couldn't rationalize. Among the papers was a short letter, not a love letter, not an apology, a professional letter, the kind that assumes you're not a person, just a case. It referenced anticipated separation and asset protection. It was written as if the ending had already been agreed upon, just not with me. I stared at that phrase, anticipated separation, and my hands started shaking again. Not with fear this time, with something heavier. A slow realization that this wasn't one betrayal. It was a whole private life built alongside mine, using my name as a tool. I heard the front door open, and in the hallway, a familiar voice called out like everything was normal. I didn't move. I slid the letter back under the other pages with hands that felt borrowed. Then I stood up slowly, like the speed of my body could change the speed of what was happening. I put the folder exactly where it had been. I smoothed the duvet. I listened to the sounds in the hallway, the keys, the shoes, the familiar small sigh that used to mean, I'm home. He walked into the bedroom and kissed my cheek. I let him. My face held the shape it was trained to hold. Neutral, tired, normal. I asked how his day was. I heard myself make a small, polite noise at the right moment. I watched him closely while pretending not to. The set of his shoulders, how easily he met my eyes, how he didn't even flinch. That was when I understood something that changed the temperature of everything. Whatever he'd done, he'd already rehearsed this part. The part where he kept living like nothing was wrong. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't sleep much either. I lay next to him and listened to his breathing, steady and untroubled, and I stared into the dark with my hand resting on my own chest, like I needed to confirm I still existed. Every few minutes, my mind tried to bargain. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe it looks worse than it is. Maybe I misunderstood. Then the images came back. My signature, not mine. The witness handwriting I recognized. The phrase anticipated separation. My throat tightened until it hurt. I wanted to shake him awake and demand the truth. I wanted to scream until the neighbors heard. I wanted him to look at me and finally admit I wasn't imagining it. But anger felt like a door he could use. If I exploded, he'd become the calm one. He'd call me unstable, emotional. He'd frame it as a misunderstanding and start managing me the way he'd managed the accounts. So I chose something colder, not hate, not revenge in the way people picture it, truth. The next morning, I acted normal again. I made tea. I answered a work email. I asked an ordinary question about dinner. I watched him relax into the comfort of my silence, and that was the first useful thing he gave me without knowing it, confirmation that he believed I didn't know. When he left, I moved through the house like I was in someone else's life. I didn't tear drawers apart. I didn't make a mess. I photographed everything I'd found, carefully, page by page, with the lighting adjusted so the handwriting was clear. I scanned copies at work on my lunch break and sent them to an email account he didn't know existed. I printed nothing at home. I started a plain list on my phone, dates of odd conversations, missing mail, the bank visit, every time he'd insisted on handling the boring admin. Not a diary, not a rant, just a timeline. Something a stranger could read and understand. Then I did the next quiet, humiliating thing. I checked the public record. It felt obscene, looking up my own home like I was an outsider. But I needed to see what was true without anyone translating it for me. I paid the small fee, hands sweating, and downloaded the title information. I read it twice. Something had changed. Not enough for a dramatic headline. Enough for a solicitor to raise an eyebrow. Enough for me to feel my skin go numb. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the kettle. My first instinct was still to protect what we had. To protect him, even. That instinct didn't disappear just because he didn't deserve it. Love doesn't switch off like a light. It leaks out slowly, through cracks you didn't know were there. And that was my moral problem. If I reported it immediately, the fallout would be immediate too. His job, our social circle, his family, everything would be pulled into the open at once. Part of me still didn't want to be the person who destroyed a life, even if it was a life built on my back. Part of me worried I'd be blamed, that people would ask why I hadn't noticed sooner. But another part, quieter, steadier, kept repeating one sentence. If I don't protect myself now, no one else will. So I made appointments I didn't tell him about. I asked careful questions. I learned what freezing things meant, what it took to undo a lie made official, how evidence needs to be handled if you want it to stand up in the light. And every evening, I came home and smiled at him like I still belonged to the story he thought he was writing. I wasn't writing rage. I was writing a record. The first crack appeared as an inconvenience. He came home one evening and tried to log into our joint account on his phone at the kitchen counter, casual, like he was checking the balance before ordering takeaway. I watched from the sink, hands in soapy water, eyes lowered. He tried again, his jaw tightened, just once. "Bank's being weird," he said too lightly. I nodded like I didn't care. "Probably an update." He laughed, but it didn't land. He put the phone down face first, a small, controlled gesture that told me more than any confession could. 2 days later, a letter arrived addressed to both of us. It wasn't one of the usual glossy bank envelopes. It was plain, administrative. The kind that means decisions have already been made. I got to it first. The bank had placed restrictions pending review. Certain transactions were suspended. Identity verification required in person. A reference number. A department name that sounded clinical and final. I left the envelope on the table where he'd find it, and I went to work. Watching someone read their own consequences is a strange kind of grief. He didn't explode. He didn't ask me directly what I'd done. He just went quiet, staring at the page a fraction too long, then folded it with exaggerated care. That night, he started asking questions in a new tone, still calm, but sharpened. "Did you speak to the bank recently?" I kept my face soft. "I called about a missing statement a while ago." "Why?" A pause. The smallest recalculation behind his eyes. "No reason," he said. "Just annoying." The next steps happened the way proper things happen. Slowly. With forms. My solicitor didn't promise fireworks. She promised process. She told me what to gather, what not to touch, what not to say in messages that could be twisted. She sent letters that used plain language to request what I was entitled to request. She filed notices that stopped certain changes from sliding through quietly. And then, like dominoes, other people started seeing what I had been forced to see. The bank asked for verification of signatures. They didn't call it forgery in their first correspondence. They didn't need to. The implications sat there on the page, heavy and unavoidable. They requested specimen signatures. They wanted identity documents. They wanted an explanation of how authorizations had been obtained. He offered to handle it, of course. He offered in the same voice he'd used for years, the voice that made problems disappear. I told him evenly that I'd go myself. At the branch, the advisor's politeness had edges now. There were notes on the file. There was an internal case number. The questions were narrower, the tone was firmer. I signed in front of them, multiple times, on their paper, in their view. I didn't have to say much. My handwriting did it for me. After that, the calls started. Not to me, to him. I could hear them from the other room. Short conversations, a forced laugh. His voice lowering, then going flat. He began coming home earlier. He stopped leaving his phone on the counter. He started picking up the post the second it hit the mat. But the truth wasn't a single document anymore. It was a trail, and trails don't respond to charm. One afternoon he asked softly, "Why are you being so formal lately?" I looked up from the laundry basket. My heart was doing something frantic, but my voice stayed level. "I'm tired," I said, "and I'm trying to be responsible." That word, responsible, hit him like a small slap. His expression flickered, not rage, not sorrow, something closer to alarm. A week later, I got an email from my solicitor with attachments. Confirmation from the Land Registry of filings and changes. A clear timeline. Names of professionals involved. Points where identity checks should have happened and hadn't. Questions that now belong to institutions, not to me. I read it at my desk at work, steadying my breathing between paragraphs. By the time I got home, he was already there, sitting too straight on the sofa, as if posture could hold the walls up. A mutual friend had apparently mentioned something. Someone at his work had asked if everything was all right. He said it like it was gossip, like it was unfair. I listened. I nodded once. I let him talk. Because this was the part I'd chosen. No scenes, no screaming, no mess he could point to and call me unstable. Just the slow, clean collapse of lies under the weight of records. And in the quiet between his sentences, I realized he wasn't scared of losing me. He was scared of being seen. The truth came out the way it usually does when you stop arguing and start documenting. It didn't arrive as a dramatic confession. It arrived as letters, verified copies, and people in offices using careful language because they don't want to be the one who says the ugly word first. The bank's fraud team confirmed what my body had known on site. The signatures didn't match. The authentication trail didn't make sense. The security changes had been made from devices I'd never used. A second point of contact had been added with an email address that wasn't mine, then used to approve transfers like it was routine. When I gave them the paperwork I'd found at home, their questions shifted. Less, could this be a misunderstanding? And more, who had access? That's when the witness line stopped being a private horror and became evidence. I didn't have to accuse anyone. I just provided the copies. My solicitor handled the rest. Requests went out, responses came back. Some were silent, some were defensive. One came with a shaky explanation that didn't survive contact with facts. The person whose handwriting I recognized didn't show up at my door to apologize. They sent a short message through someone else, asking if we could talk this through. It was written like I'd overreacted, like I was the problem for noticing. I never replied. The house was next. The land registry didn't care about anyone's charm, history, or excuses. It cared about proper execution, witnessing, and lawful authority. Once the discrepancy was flagged, the file stopped being a family matter and became a matter of record. A restriction went on the title, then another step, then an official challenge. My name was no longer something he could move around quietly. I watched him adapt in real time. He became gentler, more helpful. He started cooking. He offered weekend trips. He spoke about us in a warm, practiced way, as if closeness could blur documents. When that didn't work, he tried practicality, then guilt, then fear. All of it stayed soft, controlled. Like he understood that raising his voice would only underline what he was. The closest he came to telling the truth was one late night in the kitchen, when he said almost conversationally, "You're really going to ruin everything over paperwork?" I looked at him and realized he meant it. In his mind, the harm wasn't what he'd done. The harm was that I'd made it real. I told him calmly, "This isn't paperwork. This is my life." In the end, the consequences weren't delivered by me. They were delivered by systems built for exactly this kind of wrongdoing. The bank reversed what it could and froze what it couldn't. Accounts were closed and restructured. Investigations were opened. Questions were asked that required sworn answers, not kitchen table stories. My solicitor filed what needed filing. I filed what needed filing. I learned how to say things plainly. I did not sign that. I did not authorize that. This is not my handwriting. His workplace was notified as part of their own compliance obligations. That wasn't revenge. It was a natural result of fraud touching regulated spaces. I didn't celebrate when he came home carrying a cardboard box with his desk items. I just felt tired, the way you feel when something heavy finally drops and you're the only one still standing. The marriage ended without a screaming match. It ended in rooms where people take notes. It ended with orders and settlements and the slow restoration of what could be restored. Some things couldn't. Trust doesn't get refunded. Time doesn't get returned. When the final paperwork came through, confirming what would happen next and what would never happen again, I sat alone in my quiet house, still mine on paper, still mine in the way that mattered. And I let myself feel the full weight of it. I didn't win back my old life, I won back my name.